Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We will now move to the panel discussion. The speakers for the session are Dr. Iftekhar Chowdhury, Principal Research Fellow at ISAS-NUS and former Foreign Advisor of Bangladesh. Mr. Muhammed Aziz Khan, Chairman, Summit Group of Companies. Ms. Rubana Huq, President, Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association. Dr. Amitendu Palit, Senior Research Fellow and Research Lead, Trade and Economic Policy, ISAS-NUS. Moderating the session is Professor C. Mohan, Director, ISAS-NUS. I will now hand over the floor to Professor Mohan.
Welcome to this panel discussion. Thank you very much for joining us in such good numbers. This morning we had High Commissioner Rahman and Ambassador Foreign Secretary Huq started us off with a good opening presentations on the question of what's happening in Bangladesh, the rise of Bangladesh. I, for one, have been long convinced that Bangladesh has been one of the understudied, underreported, and underestimated countries in the world, not just in South Asia. And what we've seen happen, the new numbers, the figures that are coming today, are really a culmination of nearly 20 years of slow and steady transformation of a country. And the last 10 odd years of political stability have actually elevated this into a real international story. And as you know, good news does not travel. And finally, it takes a longer time to get across. All these years, bad news from South Asia travels, but good news does not. And Bangladesh has been the source of good news. And today, we've heard some of that this morning. We, I think, at ISAS-NUS, so we are convinced that we need to devote a lot more energy, attention to the transformations that are unfolding in Bangladesh. This is one of our first big public events, so we're really grateful and happy that we've been able to work with the Singapore Business Federation as well as Enterprise Singapore. So thank you very much. And the High Commission, which has really helped us do this event, so we're really grateful. And for Foreign Secretary Huq for coming here all the way on from his busy schedule. Second, I mean, I'm not going to add too many things, but I think I just want to say two other things. One, it's not just the economic growth that we've seen. The rise of Bangladesh actually transforms the subcontinent as a whole. That it is not just about Bangladesh rising. This is about a success of Bangladesh actually is going to change the story of the subcontinent. I mean, so far we've heard about India's rise, other economies are doing reasonably well, but it is the collective transformation of the subcontinent that Bangladesh holds the potential today. The rise of Bangladesh is going to lead to, and one of the things the Foreign Secretary talked about was integration. Integration with the world means integration with the region. That it's always fashionable to say South Asia is the least integrated region in the world. That's largely true. But the rise of Bangladesh and its good neighborly relationship with India, with Nepal, with Bhutan today, are creating conditions for the internal integration of South Asia. That is, if you stop thinking of South Asia as a whole, but you think of East South Asia, the rise of Bangladesh is laying the foundation, because he showed you the map, is critical, is a fulcrum of the eastern subcontinent, and an openness of Bangladesh is going to lead to greater integration of India, eastern subcontinent, centered around Bangladesh. So the rise of Bangladesh, as was said this morning, today it is the second largest economy. So it started out much behind Pakistan. Today, the trajectory of Bangladesh is already crossed on the per capita income. They're very close on the aggregate GDP. That how we think about South Asia, about the hierarchies in South Asia, at least on the economic domain, are going to fundamentally alter with the rise of Bangladesh and its impact on the subcontinent as a whole. More broadly, Bangladesh is also a bridge state. That is, it's not only connecting eastern subcontinent to itself, it also has the promise to connect Bangladesh and the subcontinent to Southeast Asia. That while we have difficulties on the Bangladesh-Myanmar border today, that we are part of the BIMSTEC organization, which includes East South Asia, as well as Thailand and Myanmar. We've seen some rejuvenation of that organization. So Bangladesh is positioned exactly to be able to do more integration between Eastern subcontinent and Southeast Asia. We're just seeing the beginning of it. The Foreign Secretary also talked about the maritime side, that Bangladesh is the center of Bay of Bengal. And if you stop thinking about South and Southeast Asia, but if you think of the Bay of Bengal as a maritime community, then it stretches from Sri Lanka, India, Nepal, Bhutan, of course, as hinterland, your Bangladesh, your Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and with a little bit of Singapore is always there. And so we can't forget the little red dot, so Singapore too. If you think of this as a coherent sub-region, then we're talking about actually the enormous possibilities that open up. The Foreign Secretary also showed you a map where the so-called BCIM corridor, that is Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar corridor. There are some talks, but I think that also tells you Bangladesh is also positioned to connect the subcontinent to southwestern China. The Foreign Secretary said, look, this is not a new idea. If you go back to the Second World War, we had the Stilwell Road, we had a whole lot of Britain and America worked together to supply Chongqing from the subcontinent, from Bengal. And if you go back even further, many Singaporeans will be familiar, the so-called Tea Horse Road, which actually connected Yunnan to the subcontinent, ran through this exactly the same route. So when we're talking about BRI, we're talking about the Indo-Pacific, we're talking about South Asian regionalism. In all this, Bangladesh is going to be very, very critical a role, and I think in stable, open, and growing Bangladesh is going to be a force for good in the subcontinent and the wider region. And we have 4 distinguished panelists here to speak about it. So we're going to start with Dr. Chowdhury, and all of them are going to take maybe 15 minutes or less, so that we'll have some time for question and answer from this panel. We start with Dr. Chowdhury.
Many thanks, Director. Professor Raja Mohan, Foreign Secretary Shahidul Huq, High Commissioner Mustafizur Rahman, friends. We've had a scintillating beginning remarks from the Foreign Secretary earlier on today. Shahidul Huq has been the longest serving Foreign Secretary in Bangladesh, and not without reason. I mean, he's a person of prodigious capabilities. I've had the privilege of having him work with me for many, many years, as I have had Mustafizur Rahman as well, the High Commissioner. One thing that is often not mentioned is that Bangladesh has to do with a very small band of men and women who, under the aegis of the Foreign Secretary, serve the cause of diplomacy for the country, which is extremely important for Bangladesh's development. And this is a group of people, young men and women, or some not so young anymore, but men and women whom any country in the world would be proud to call their own. They're an exceptional, good group of diplomats, some of the finest that one would ever know in the diplomatic scene. It might appear a tad surprising to many that Bangladesh has suddenly been catapulted into a list of countries whose rise merits watching. But this has not been as sudden as it may seem. There are several reasons, more gradual than sudden, that can be ascribed as causes. First, effective use of early foreign aid received. Second, a steady but sustained move from a socialist to open and liberal economic policies. Third, as land space shrank to accommodate urbanization, a shift from agriculture to manufacturing. Fourth, social transformation positively impacting gender issues. Fifth, massive initiatives to mitigate and adapt to the effects of natural disasters and climate change. Sixth, focus on health and education. And finally, a decade of political stability. The factors combine to create today's positive perception of a nation that is said to be on the rise and rise. Yet, Any complacency, and the Foreign Secretary has warned about this, would be a grave mistake. While progress may seem phenomenal, the matrix on which it is taking place has weaknesses, some of it structural. Simply put, it would be unwise to take matters for granted. Nonetheless, numbers, and you have heard some numbers since this morning, demonstrate a remarkable pattern. You have heard that in 2016, the IMF billed the country as the fastest growing major economy, etc. And the GDP has grown at a sustained average rate of about 6% over decades. And 2017, it was 7.28. And 2018, it was 7.68, I think. I mean, I don't have the, speaking off the head. You've heard about Kissinger's assessment. Let me tell you, I was privileged to be in the first planning commission of the country, and those days we were exposed to a theory of the World Bank called the Tri-Edge theory. According to it, one group of developing countries developed on their own steam. Another group of countries needed a bit of support to develop. And the third had no hope and could only devote, according to the World Bank, their time to the pursuit of poetry and literature. And then put Bangladesh in the third category. But what a difference today. Now, two major drivers of growth have been migration and ready-made garments, RMG industry. Remittances from our migrants fetch around $15 billion annually, but tightening rules, particularly in the Middle East, are beginning to challenge this continuing prospects. Now, RMG. Bangladesh is, of course, the second largest exporter after China. Now, in the 6 month, and some numbers here, July to January period, 2018-19, the sector earned 24.17 billion. Now, of its nearly 4.3 million workers, most are women, which has a positive impact on gender mainstreaming. In April 2019, the exporters, the BGM, Garments Exporters Association, elected the first woman president, Rubana Huq. We are privileged to have her on the podium with us this afternoon. And might I add that in this short time, her performance has been commendable and deserving of the highest plaudits. The industry does confront risks, though. Cheaper wages in Africa, for instance, also a possible market shrinkage, mainly due to preference erosion in view of the impending graduation from the status of least developed countries, or LDC, by 2024, by the time Bangladesh hopes to graduate out of the list of LDCs. The ideal answer would be to broaden the export basket and leapfrog to high-end manufacturing, for which Bangladesh does possess the intellectual capital and the talent pool. Together with it, greater attraction of investments. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI of China, and PM Hasina, as you have heard, had recently conducted a very successful visit to that country, is a source. But deft handling of the process would be necessary to avoid pitfalls such as being mired in excessive debts. BRI will come handy on gap financing of infrastructural projects. An interesting model here is worth citing. When India offers co-funding to a BRI project, and India is not a BRI participant, the project is moved to the BCIM category, and this is the sub-regional grouping of Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar. The Paira port project, for example, is an example, and this has raised no heckles. In other words, what I'm suggesting is that there are ways and means of getting around the politics of India-China differences by getting both of them involved and raising just the title of the project to perhaps another category. It would still be Chinese funding, Indian funding, and Bangladesh coordinating. Now, if one were to list three supreme priorities for Bangladesh as it graduates out of the list of NDCs, it would be market access, and market access. The advantages of Europe's everything but arms policy that has allowed Bangladesh duty-free, quota-free market access will end soon. And it will end as Bangladesh graduates out of LDCs. A visiting Indian minister, Suresh Prabhu, had urged that graduation should accompany thinking about free trade agreements, such as with India, he had suggested. Similar ideas came from China, Malaysia, Jordan, Turkey, and Sri Lanka. Thereafter, in January 2019, now this is important, a report of the United Nations urged Bangladesh to reflect on FTAs with major trading partners. So the United Nations endorsed the idea. Now, Singapore stands out as one such potential partner. Prime Minister Hasina's visit here, March 2018, deepened economic ties. As an FTA partner, and with my perch in Singapore, I can say this with confidence and without fear of contradiction. Singapore, with its vast experience, can be a good mentor as well. Obviously, Bangladeshi policymakers would not be faulted for a modicum of circumspection. Three impeding factors are immediately discernible. One, a limited list of competitive products. Two, a lack of institutional capacity to address relevant issues. And three, the understandable wariness of a developing country to deal with another that is developed in an FTA situation. If you have a developing country, you're dealing with a developed country, there could be problems therein. All related elements will need to be thoroughly examined. To my mind, and drawing from my own experience, I believe that the Bangladesh Tariff Commission is best equipped to do so. However, and given the fact that Bangladesh has a vibrant private sector, the private sector can and indeed must provide appropriate policy inputs to the government in this regard. Negotiations for any FTA will doubtless be a long and arduous journey, but it is an incontrovertible axiom that no journey can finish unless it starts. To conclude, Bangladesh is a nation on the move. The kinetic energy that propels its people to move forward is derived from its ethos and its historical propensity for struggle. Small wonder that there is great empathy of the Bangladeshis with the wise words of the mighty Rabindranath Tagore. And Tagore had said, if one wishes to cross the river, it does not do to stand at its edge and simply stare at the waters. One must wade in. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chowdhury, for that eloquent presentation as always. Dr. Rubana Huq.
I think I got an extra round of applause just because I'm a woman, so thank you all. Honorable Foreign Secretary, High Commissioner, co-panelists, and of course friends and colleagues in the audience. I'm Rubana Huq, and I represent the ready-made garment sector of Bangladesh. Before I move on, just a very quick reference to the previous speakers. Ambassador Gopinath Pillai had talked about bottomless basket being transformed into development surprise, but he spoke about inequality. Let me just assure you that under the Prime Ministership of our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, the government has a goal of eradicating poverty by 2041, and the poverty level has actually gone down in the last 40 years, and I'm going to be sharing some statistics with you. The High Commissioner spoke about gender equality. Bangladesh is actually now, according to the latest report of WEF, standing at 47th position, whereas the United States does not even come within the 60th. So we're doing good with gender parity. The Foreign Secretary also spoke about connectivity, which is a primary stress of Bangladesh government. I would like to say that in our sector, we've just started doing a pilot on e-wallet for our workers, through which the workers will be paid. Not only paid, it'll also be hosting workers' profile. It's a vendor-neutral, interoperable digital platform which will give access to workers not only to receive their payments, but also to make payments, settle their bills, and even receive funds. So that's going to be good for us, yes. And Professor Mohan spoke about the regional integration of South Asia. Well, I'm one person who believes in, I spell South Asia with no gap in between. So I do South Asia together. But unfortunately, and most unfortunately, the interregional trade actually is less than 5% in South Asia. And my very own dear Dr. Iftekhar Chowdhury, reminded me very quietly that, speak about women empowerment when you deliver your speech. So I said, of course. So let me begin with women empowerment. More than 60% of our worker force is actually women. The Prime Minister is a woman. We have more than 20% now of our lawmakers, women. So we are basically a very resilient nation, and I call Bangladesh a story of phoenix, where we rise from the ashes every time. In about 40 years, GDP from 18 billion down to 274 billion, trade 3.18 to 95.53 billion, investment to GDP 17.6% to 31.23%, poverty down from 58.5 to 21.8. Vision for a developed nation, there we are. We are standing at an 8.13, we're targeting 8.2 actually. Export growth, I'm not even going to say anything right now. So in about 4 decades, Bangladesh's economy shifted its base from agriculture to industry, significantly driven by R&D export. Share of industry to GDP growth, 17.31, way back in 1881, up to 35.14%. In 40 years, trade GDP ratio peaked from 21% to 38%. But we've had overdependence of exports on RMG. The country used to be dependent only by 16% way back in 85-86. Now we're at an 83.5%, and it's time to diversify. I must say this too. In 4 decades, Bangladesh has emerged as the second largest garment exporter in the world. And look at our export figures. Our latest one is $30.61 billion, 2017, 2018. So it's an unbeaten path of growth. Garment industry at a glance, 4,615 clothing factories, $10 billion investment, exporting to 163 countries, 4.4 million workers, 425 spinning, 796 textile mills, and we cover most of our accessories need, and export is, of course, 30.61 billion. Made in Bangladesh is economical, responsible, and green. So we had the tragedy of Rana Plaza way back in 2013, after which Bangladesh ready-made garment industry remediated. So we've had 37 years of experience, price, quality, or backward linkage, versatility, all of them are our advantage. As far as green is concerned, for once, Bangladesh didn't really follow the prescriptive path. We have 85 LEED certified green factories, 23 platinum, and we have 320 or more factories waiting for certification. We have the world's highest rated knitwear, woven, washing, and denim mills. So Bangladesh is green, and it's not a top-down approach, it's a bottom-up, because we've done it without being prescribed. Impacting lives of millions, so 83.5% share of export earnings comes from RMG, 4.4 million employment, 60% share of female labor force, 11% contribution to GDP. and the challenges. Graduation to middle-income country. Why do we need to diversify? Why do we need regional collaboration? With LDC graduation, like Dr. Chowdhury said, we are going to be suffering a possible impact of preference erosion. And why though? Number one, by 2024, we lose GSP to most of the countries. Japan being one has, of course, assured us so far that privileges are going to continue, but with others we lose. And 2027, we lose out with the EU as well. Now, we have a couple of problems there. With losing GSP, and if we want to actually qualify for GSP plus, we have to have double transformation also. So we have to have backward linkage in our country, which we currently don't really have for woven especially. So LDC graduation is going to be a challenge because we may stand to lose almost $2 billion worth of exports. And one of our biggest flaw is actually, I'll call it flaw, is our concentration on the basic products. Like 20% of our export is actually t-shirt, 16% is sweater, and that means that any imposition will have a significant impact. And Bangladesh is another challenge is the 6.5% cap that EU has for LDC graduation. We are almost doing 16.5% of export to EU, so under GSP. Double transformation once again, so this is where probably the intra-regional or even ASEAN +1 perhaps could work for Bangladesh. So far, 75% of our goods are covered under GSP, so we tend to lose a lot if we lose it. We have over-concentration of products and markets, so 75% exports are concentrated in 5 basic items, 80% cotton-based, 85% concentrated to EU and North America. And there is the paradox of price, wage, and competitiveness in Bangladesh. So far, we've been losing out on prices. To USA, we are down by 7.04%. To EU, we are down by 3.64%. Potentials, I cannot but speak about ASEAN here because I'll seize the opportunity because it's Singapore. So we have a potential, and it's not small. If you look at the screen, you'll see Singapore actually imports $2.58 billion worth of garment. Malaysia does 1.68, Thailand 1.16, Vietnam 1.09. If you look at this, in 2018, ASEAN imported $8 billion worth of apparel. Growth of import has been 112%. And if you look at this, you'll probably see the fastest has been Indonesia and Malaysia, and Singapore, unfortunately, is at a 6.58% growth. Could Bangladesh become a sourcing base for ASEAN's apparel need? Yes, it could. It could. Because if we look at it, you will see ASEAN actually imports almost $57 billion worth of apparel from the world. And from Bangladesh, it's only actually 314.50 million. See, so that's sad for us, really sad. ASEAN facts, we all know, 642 million people. By 2030, the 4th largest economy, creating almost 63 million households of consuming class. And expenditure in 2017 in ASEAN in only clothing and footwear has been 51.2 billion. Digital economy, great. You have 200 million digital consumers and 230 million online engaged. And let's not forget, ASEAN is actually, its growth is 7.3%, so great. Bangladesh holds only 9.57% share in Singapore's total apparel imports. We'd like to increase that. See, 2014, 2015, it was only 88 million, and now it's even down. It's 62 million only. So, High Commissioner, we really want your help here. How can collaboration enhance trade? Lots of things. Value addition has been insignificant in Bangladesh. Look at this. In volume, we're okay. In value, we're going down. Could we collaborate? For instance, Indonesia, Thailand does a lot of, and also Malaysia does a lot of fabric. Could we have a regional integration, some vertical integration, so that we can import fabric from you and export it back to you? Singapore anyway has a zero duty on Bangladesh. So that could be. Look at it, Bangladesh imports almost nothing actually. Bangladesh import from ASEAN is 540 million. It could be so much more. 4IR, Fourth Industrial Revolution, is hitting Bangladesh. Low-end manufacturing is going to impact. There's going to be a lot of onshoring from our customers. So what we need to do is we could collaborate in terms of knowledge sharing. You could help us with the capacity building when it comes to R&D, with automation, and what would our workers do? I mean, 4.4 million workers are not going to be becoming coders overnight. So if they're going to lose jobs, can we reskill them? So industry to innovation, innovation to industry is something that we could talk to you about. Sustaining competitiveness is going to be difficult for us, so we could collaborate on a lot of research topics, especially on innovation, and of course, wage skill grids. Diversification is needed, of course, investment in backward linkage is needed, high price segments we need. We could, like Dr. Chowdhury was talking about, FTAs and economic diplomacy, and we have gurus of economic diplomacy sitting right in front of us and also in the panel, so we could probably take advantage of that. I have imposed on your patience. Thank you very much for hearing me out, but I do hope that by being here we open yet another door of economic collaboration. I'm meeting a lot of people in Singapore this time. I'm hoping High Commissioner will actively engage. I'm sure he will. He's very dynamic. And let's see if we can take our friendship to the next level. Thank you all.
The next speaker is Mr. Aziz Khan.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to be standing here amongst such intellectual people. I found out that I am the only non-PhD person. So give me a break. It's not easy to be sitting with an audience of such intellect and with a panel of such distinguishedness. So being myself a businessman, it's not the easiest thing. Thank you very much for the audience. I see a full, that itself shows that Bangladesh is rising. The amount of interest that all of you have about Bangladesh proves where Bangladesh is going. Thank you very much to the National University of Singapore, ISAS Enterprise Singapore, Singapore Business Federation, and the Bangladesh High Commission. Thank you for arranging this, for enabling us to discuss how the Rising Bangladesh works. I will be speaking from a perspective of an investor. It will be difficult for me to talk in front of them about academics or about certain other things, how the Bangladesh has expanded. The government's portion has been very well spoken by the Secretary as well as the High Commissioner. So I will try to speak more as an investor. Summit Group has been investing in Bangladesh for the last 40 years. We started with Taka 30,000 and invested about $2.5 billion in Bangladesh. So the perspective is more from that point of view. We have had support from huge multilaterals, from IFC, Asian Development Bank, DEG, FMO, and so on and so forth in getting this. We have partnerships with Mitsubishi Corporation, with GE Corporation, with Wärtsilä Corporation, large international bodies. So I think I see the perspective of what they are thinking of when they're trying to invest in Bangladesh and what is coming into our mind, both from the lender's perspective, investors' perspective, as well as multinational corporations' perspective. I have been a Singapore PR myself from 1988, so also a Singapore perspective, if I may. First of all, I think I'll go to the challenges first, so that one can understand how does the investor feels about challenges. Most of the time, non-spoken challenge is really fundamentalism, militancy, and the fear of having a country where Muslim majority is there. It's difficult for many others to speak about it, but I think I'll take this on as the first challenge that comes in the minds of people who are trying to invest in billions of dollars and require the security and safety of the people as well in that country, as well as their investments. So that is something that comes in the minds of large multinational corporations. I would like to say that that really is a wrong perception. That's a distorted perception, if you don't mind my saying that. Bangladesh is a country which is about 2,000 miles away from the nearest Muslim country, Pakistan and the Middle East. In between is India, who themselves are trying to avoid any sort of intrusion of militancy into their country, and therefore the physical movement of militancy into Bangladesh is almost impossible. Barring a small construction of a restaurant being attacked in Bangladesh, there has not been any single attack. There has been much more attacks in other European countries and other European states. So I would like to really request whoever is thinking about Bangladesh that that is a perception which is incorrect and certainly not there. The militancy is not there. Bangladesh is in fact quite on the other side of it, quite an equal country, quite a country where the people love each other, people welcome very hospitable people. Even the gender equality that has been discussed has been major in Bangladesh. The Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, the Speaker of the Parliament, Shirin Sharmin, Dr. Shirin Sharmin, and of course our distinguished panelist, Dr. Rubana Huq, representing the largest industrial sector with about 5,000 factories and about 5 million people. Out of that, as she has mentioned, 60% are women folk. That proves the equality that Bangladesh thinks, not only in terms of gender, in terms of religion, in terms of human being. We are all human beings, and we believe deeply in our heart that we are human beings and we are all equal. So for equality and for Bangladesh, a clap is necessary. The second concern I have seen in the minds of the investors is political uncertainty, as they call it, political risk. And I know it even more because I have to pay political risk premium when we invest in Bangladesh. So the political risk is also a past tense. It's about the past. We have had hartal or the band strike, whatever each one calls in Bangladesh. It's popularly known as hartal. That used to happen in the 2000s. 2006 is probably the last time we saw majority of them, and in 2014 a little bit, but it's a forgotten past. The younger persons today in Bangladesh do not feel that hartal is a way of protest, and not like Hong Kong or not like Paris. The Bangladesh did not have hartals or the challenges that comes with strikes for investors. So that's another challenge that has been removed. The political uncertainty, Bangladesh is a democratic country. For all that it matters, the Awami League government has been elected. This is for the third consecutive time. So after they have done 10 years. Bangladesh is a country which has accepted or taken up democracy like England, where we have a unicameral parliament, and therefore elections happen and whoever gets even one more vote is elected. And these elections, it is quite common for, you would see the headlines that somebody is complaining about about the elections. Complaining about the elections is also a proof that there is democracy. I mean, being able to talk, I think even sometimes against PAP in Singapore, there are people who are saying that the elections are not proper. United States, of course, is an example itself with the Russian fever that the elections were. So I would, Indonesia, we have had recent elections, in Europe, elections. So the party who is not winning would always have some qualms about the elections, and that is reflected across the world everywhere. There is no reason to overemphasize on that in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a democracy which is running. The Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has been elected as the Prime Minister by the people, for the people, of the people, and she acts in that manner. So I personally feel that another huge applause should be going to Bangladesh's democracy. I'll now come to the third concern, which is much lesser but a concern, is about land. The property rights in Bangladesh are, in the opinion of the investor, onerous because lands are fragmented and they can't get a large piece of land for their investment. But this goes both ways. I mean, if you have property rights, then the person who is investing, he will have property in Bangladesh and he will also receive the same property rights that the present owners are receiving. Having said that, Bangladesh government has really taken this on and has removed this by creating economic zones. About 100 economic zones have been established, and everybody who requests land now can get land from in these economic zones, almost ready-made lands with many incentives, fiscal incentives, as well as other foreign direct. Foreign direct investment is, of course, there is an act which in my opinion is unnecessary because the country is already very, very lawful. So, but anyway, there is also a Foreign Investment Protection Act, I think. So the land concern is gone. Now I will come more onto the opportunities, why we should all invest, and I am investing in Bangladesh. The workers are amazing. In Bangladesh, you have one of the low-cost production facilities, and the workers are gaining their abilities and their productivities, enhancing their productivities in very fast. The industrial section has been done by the manufacturing of garments. So any other industry, the workers know how an industry functions. They know that you have to be on time, you have to produce, you will get overtime, and so on and so forth. So the basis for an industrial revolution, if you call it, or manufacturing revolution, you call it, that aspect has been created. That possibility is there. So it's a matter of whether we take that opportunity and manufacture in Bangladesh. With that comes the market. It's really 170 million people growing at 1.1%, as well as these people are earning now $1,900 to $1,950. I think 2019 June, it will be $1,950. With a GDP of about $300 billion, somebody wrote 260 billion. I think that is 2017-18 this year. GDP expectation is about $300 billion, rising at 8.13%. That's a huge consumption. Who can afford to not go into this market of consumers? Which manufacturer would not like to go into this market? And then there is beyond the international market. And for that international market, as the BGMEA president has mentioned, and as all of us know, the whole world is growing by virtue of its trade, by its trade. World Trade Organization, though in a little bit of jam now because of the United States, but the World Trade Organization and other organizations have all expressed that the whole world develops through trade. People come to know each other through trade. And this trade is possible now in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is becoming a major exporter. Per capita manufacturing of garments, Dr. Rubana Huq, is the highest in Bangladesh. China is the number one. Of course, they're number one in almost any manufacturing. But the number two manufacturer is Bangladesh, and per capita manufacturing of garments is the highest in Bangladesh. I say this because you have this whole new opportunity of almost a country which is providing you the platform to manufacture. I wish I could become a manufacturer. I'm just becoming a little bit too old and to not have the, my daughters are also aspirational in too much knowledge-based economy. So, but really manufacturing is the thing to do in Bangladesh for the local market as well as for the international market. These are being governed by a government, which is amazing. I mean, people talk about government. It's as I said, unicameral government. So you get decisions, legislations done very quickly. 350 members of parliament, prime minister, 50 ministers. That's it. There is no senate. There is no upper chamber. One single government body, one single parliament which sits by the people, for the people, of the people. The members of parliament can decide over there very fast. They're changing laws, they're amending laws for the time, they're creating new laws. The Digital Act has been one of the fastest in Bangladesh compared to all other countries. Similar laws are being taken up to enable the country to grow faster and faster. Bureaucracy. I mean, I have what to say about bureaucracy. Dr. Iftekhar Chowdhury is over here. He was a bureaucrat. Look at his brilliance. He is now principal fellow. So you can see the brilliance of the bureaucracy. His Excellency Mustafizur Rahman, His Excellency Shahidul Huq. You have seen that. I mean, the best of the educated, the most of the learned, they go into the Bangladeshi bureaucracy and they run and they work hard. They apply their intellectual mind. They work very hard to take the country forward. And I am full of admiration for Bangladesh's bureaucracy. I mean, people say bureaucrats are, but it is not true for Bangladesh. Bangladesh bureaucrats are working very hard. Then you have the judiciary. The judiciary has been taken from the colonial era, from the England and Wales, laws of England and Wales, and there is a Supreme Court in Bangladesh, High Court, lower courts, and alternative dispute resolutions, one of the most important aspects for businessmen investing in Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is with ICSID, with ICC, and with SIAC, Singapore Chamber, Singapore International Arbitration Council, I think. Forgive me if I have not correctly stated it. But these alternative dispute resolutions provide certainty of immediate good dispute resolutions, differences of opinion, or the different way of looking at a contract. You can get judicious minds, good jurisprudence, good jurists applying their mind and giving you a solution to your challenges, if any, between the parties. Now, in order to do business, the next thing that you require is really infrastructure. And what an amazing leap Bangladesh is taking towards infrastructure. I myself generate electricity, as I mentioned, we generate about 2,000 megawatts, generating another 1,000 megawatts. To put it into perspective, Singapore requires 6,000 megawatts of electricity. So Summit alone produces about 50% of Singapore's electricity requirement. The country produces about 20,000 megawatts of electricity. It started in 2008 when the government took it up very, very profoundly. From 3,300 megawatts to 20,000 megawatts by 2020. And by 2030, it should be to 30,000 megawatts. And each and every home would be having electricity. At this point, about 80% of the homes, industries have access to electricity. That would be 200%, and uninterrupted 50 hertz electricity is what they would be receiving. The modern world has also brought about huge technological innovations into the generation of electricity, transmission of electricity, and distribution of electricity. So that's one of the challenges that you've had in developing countries, lack of electricity, which has been rightly removed in Bangladesh. Ports, my good Lord, amazing. The government of Bangladesh is expanding its port facilities. I mean, Singapore could be in a difficult situation. And I mean, the Matarbari project, which the Japanese are helping a lot, which is a very modern port with 14-meter craft, deep sea port into the south of Bangladesh, that will be able to take in 200,000 tons of ships. And they're creating a whole city over there, the Matarbari project, with investment of about $7 billion, out of which I think somewhere around $4 billion is being supported by Japan. And the Japanese consultants and the Japanese way of thinking of preciseness and so on and so forth. I have my friends over here from Mitsubishi Corporation. I have seen their due diligence and the torture they enforce upon me by going into very, very details. So these are huge learnings for Bangladesh. These are huge possibilities for Bangladesh. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm crossing 15 minutes. That's amazing, you know. So the port, internet. We lay internet, and the 40,000 kilometers of fiber has been laid by Summit, and the country has about 70,000 kilometers of fiber optics, and they are operating with 3G, and will hopefully leapfrog into 5G, enabling the whole world to be connected in Bangladesh in instances. The latest challenges, the macroeconomic conditions have been mentioned by others. The latest challenges of trade war is a boon for Bangladesh. The 25% tariff that has been imposed on China and other countries has not been imposed on Bangladesh. The United States is the largest importer. So here you have a huge opportunity of shifting your manufacturing to Bangladesh, receive the low cost of workers, receive these amazing infrastructures, and then being able to access the international market. Bangladesh has risen and shall rise. That is inevitable. My request to the good audience and to myself and to all of you, let us be part of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was quite. Amitendu, you were the last speaker.
Thank you very much, Professor Aziz, Mohan, and the distinguished panel. It's an honor to be here today and be a part of the very exciting journey that Bangladesh has embarked on. There are a couple of points which have already come through from the speakers, and I will not emphasize on them too much. The issue of preferential market access being withdrawn has already been discussed. And let me come straight away on the basis of what has already been said to the fact that it appears for Bangladesh at this point in time, and with it poised to enter the middle income category, an aggressive or a robust or a proactive, whichever way one describes it, an FTA engagement strategy is important. And there are three reasons I would flag why that is important. The first is, of course, the fact that the existing preferential market access in countries like the European Union mostly, and partly in North America, also in other OECD countries, would essentially be progressively phased out over a period of time. So that has to be compensated by obtaining preferential market access from other countries, which can only come through bilateral, regional, or plurilateral free trade agreements. The second point is that I think it's an imperative that Bangladesh would want to continue on the path that it has embarked on till now, with a focus on just not exports, but increasing the rate of growth, attracting more investments, in short, a much more robust macroeconomy. And for that, it's important to obtain greater shares of the global markets. The greater share of global markets is a very important condition for countries to keep maintaining their rate of growth, not just at what they are right now, but beyond that. There is a view shared by some quarters that internal economic acceleration is sufficient for maintaining a certain amount of growth of the country. Unfortunately, historically, there is very little support in favor of that argument. And without substantive capturing of global markets, countries really have not been able to push beyond a certain level of per capita and overall income. And the third is, I think this is a fact which needs to be noticed specifically for Bangladesh. There are countries which have graduated from LDC status. By and large, most of them, including in South Asia, have done so on the basis of the success they have achieved in services. Primarily tourism, primarily travel. Bangladesh is a very rare example of a country which has graduated on the basis of its success in manufacturing exports. And that's a point which needs to be noted insofar as the larger, greater example of LDCs that are to follow Bangladesh is concerned. Now, when it comes to an FTA engagement strategy, obviously the obvious questions are with whom and why. And before giving any ideas on those, let me just go into this from a basic question that if today a country like Bangladesh, which stood until now, has not really engaged in FTAs, primarily because they did not require to. if it wants to go ahead and engage in FTAs, who should it engage with? Well, the basic question first is, at a very primary level, the geography. The geography is important. Bangladesh has an enviable geography. There's no denying that. If one looks back at the countries that have really been successful on FTAs, Bangladesh does have the very necessary conditions of being a coastal country, being a country which is situated at the junction of the land and sea, being a country which is situated in one of the most dynamic regions of the world. And this is a dynamic region in the sense of growth not having saturated, growth having enough impetus to come out, because there are large economies, large emerging markets, let's not forget, like China and India on both sides, and a very active Southeast Asian region on the other, and the entire Indian Ocean region to follow as one most westward. So geography is extremely important. And when it comes to geography, let me allude to a point. This is where the current character of Bangladesh's trade becomes very important. Almost 80% of Bangladesh's current exports go to Europe and North America. But if one looks at the imports, the scenario is very different. China, India, Singapore are the three main sources of imports for Bangladesh, and between them they account for more than 40% of Bangladesh's imports. Now, what one would argue immediately, and as a basic point, is that these are the three countries which, on the basis of geography, on the basis of the current pattern, and let's not forget, many of us overlook the fact that Bangladesh is actually a part of a preferential trade agreement with China and India, and has been so for a very long time, the Bangkok Agreement, which is otherwise known as the Asia-Pacific Trade Agreement since 1978, where a large number of tariff lines are traded on preferential market access. The simple point would be that if these are the three countries with which Bangladesh engages for deeper, more robust trade talks, what is there to be lost? The concern would be that if the tariff lines are brought down, more imports from these countries would flood the country. That logic holds only if the character of the imports is sensitive to price. It doesn't hold if the imports are in volume and are going to add to the absorption capacity of the economy. It really doesn't hold that way, which means that irrespective of the current MFN applied tariffs that Bangladesh imposes, and let me also bring this point up, there's often this point raised about a number of countries about they having very high tariffs, but that conclusion comes from the bound rates which these countries are allowed by the WTO. If one compares the bound rates, that is the level to which countries are allowed to raise tariffs under exigencies, as opposed to the tariffs they're actually applying, which are the applied rates, the difference can be astonishing. And this is evident if one looks at Bangladesh's current tariff profile, but the bound rates are very high, there's no denying that, but that's a flexibility which the WTO specifically gives to the LDCs. But when one looks at the applied tariffs, the tariffs are not really high. I mean, nothing compared to what the global scenario is in a number of even OECD countries who are applying tariffs on this product. So I'm not really a buyer of the argument that if China, India, Singapore, or a few other countries are those with whom Bangladesh engages in FTAs, there's going to be a glut of imports coming in. I don't think that's going to be the case, particularly when one looks even more closely at the categories of imports, like woven fabrics, for example. I don't think that's going to happen in a big way. But China, India, Singapore, this troika, and pushed back a little backward, eastward, connected with a geography, actually gets Bangladesh very close to an arrangement called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So what I would argue is that Bangladesh doesn't have to negotiate with each of these three countries bilaterally. What it just has to do is to negotiate with the RCEP. The RCEP comprises the ASEAN. It comprises China, India, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. And the non-ASEAN members are already those countries which are extending preferential tariff facility to Bangladesh. What is needed to be looked at is carefully the character of the FTA, because this is where Bangladesh's main challenge, I think, is going to come up. The problem is that Bangladesh is not accustomed to FTA negotiations. And today's FTAs are far, far more than tariffs. Tariffs are a very small, rudimentary part of current FTAs. Today's FTAs are comprehensive, primarily services driven, very heavily getting focused on data. Subjects like electronic commerce have become extremely important as part of FTAs, as have investments. So any countries that Bangladesh engages with, Bangladesh's objective might be, the primary objective might be to compensate the loss of tariffs. Bangladesh's focus will be on getting those tariffs obtainable in those markets, but what about these countries? What are they going to look out for? They are actually going to look out for a composite set of outcomes, which would include not just market access for goods, but a bigger range and set of issues. And this is where I want to bring in two issues as my final concluding point. One is, I think today Bangladesh has to look at FTA in line with the greater development around it. And that greater development, the most face-on development is connectivity. I think there are two ways in which this issue can be looked at. One is Bangladesh has embarked on improving its domestic infrastructure substantively. It's looking closely at trade facilitation. But any engagement in a formal architecture will push it into a band of countries which are much ahead on connectivity. I allude to a simple parameter called the Logistics Performance Index, prepared by the World Bank, where till now Bangladesh is at number 100. Rankings are immaterial in terms of the changes that they produce, but I think it's the qualitative factor. Today, it's not a matter of miracle that the 12 best ports of the world actually belong to China, out of the top 30. Now, when one gets into an arrangement with these countries, a country like Bangladesh, or for that matter, any other country of the region has to accept the fact that this is an FTA with a partner country which is already far ahead on logistics. So the basic issue, very simple rudimentary issue of shipment of goods from one point to another is going to be much less expensive for the liners of those countries, as opposed to a country like Bangladesh, or even as opposed to a country from any other part of South Asia, like Sri Lanka, for example. And let me here just draw one stylized fact into the point. We tend to overlook the trade in services when we focus on trade in goods and manufacturing. When one looks at the character of Bangladesh's trade in services, the most dominant part of it is actually transport. And the most dominant part of that transport is the import in transport services, which actually reflects upon the fact that it's not just the fact that Bangladesh is importing a lot through the sea, but also the fact that there is a dependence on foreign liners. I think this is a reflection of the fact that countries which have really done well in maritime trade also happen to largely own the maritime liners, the merchant shipping vessels. And that's a characteristic of countries like China, Japan, Korea. Singapore is an exception, but there are a large number of other countries, even in Saudi Arabia, which are owning the liners. So that's a game which Bangladesh will have to play effectively. But what I do think is that if Bangladesh looks at connectivity and FTA together, connectivity can actually lead to be or be an enabler for structural transformation of the economy. And let me connect this to another point here, the final point that I'm going to make. And Dr. Huq referred to this issue of diversification of exports. I think the challenge is very real, because I think the challenge is not just in terms of depending upon a bunch of exports. That's one part of the story. The bigger part of the story is the tremendous change in organization of production that has started happening across the world, particularly in the fashion industry. And I have veteran business people with me, and I think they would agree with me on the point that earlier fashion used to be driven by 4 seasons. Winter, spring, summer, monsoon. Today there are 52 seasons. That's how fast fashion industry has changed, and it is complemented by the emergence of techniques like 3D printing, which are completely customized, which are changing their value chains up-down, which are reducing the level of wastage, and which, in fact, are no longer dependent upon the cardinal advantage of availability of cheap labor. Cheap labor is no more the factor determining comparative advantage when it comes to this sort of a production. It's the access to technology and the ability to organize technology around it. So what I would conclude with is that if this is the scenario, if Bangladesh is going to engage in FTAs, if connectivity is the game around Bangladesh, and it needs to diversify, the answer to all this lies in a very strong push to digital connectivity. I think that's where Bangladesh's most formidable challenge will be, because when one looks at countries like Singapore, India, China, Korea, or for that matter, the whole of ASEAN, the emphatic response of all these countries is going to shift to digital connectivity down the line. So I think the debate needs to focus emphatically there. It's very heartening to note the digital economy advances that Bangladesh had made. I would only argue for connecting the internal focus to the external focus, which is going to multiply the benefits. Thank you.